Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session in our series, American English Live Teacher Development. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Moderator Kate, and I'm so happy to see everyone here with us as we learn and share today about two frameworks for integrating critical thinking into the exploration of culture. Again, as I said, my name is Moderator Kate, and with us today are our host, John Mark King, and our presenter, Andy Noonan. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand over the mic to John Mark King, and we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, John Mark.
Hi, thanks, Kate. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for asking. I'm really excited about today's presentation. How about you?
Oh, very excited. Yeah, I think it's going to be a
Super.
good
Well, let's get started.
All right.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our third session in this exciting series, American English Live Teacher Development. Sessions will be held every other Wednesday at 8 a.m. and at 1 p.m. Eastern Time from right here in Washington, D.C. We hope you're following us here on American English for Educators so that you receive notifications, updates, new sessions, and lots of other announcements. So check out our events page to see all of the other upcoming professional development events that are listed there. My name is John Mark, as Kate said. I work right here in Washington at the Office of English Language Programs, and I'm part of the American English social media team. I'm super happy to be your facilitator and your host today. We love to see teachers learning and exchanging ideas. I want to send a very special thank you to Celia Cava Gonzalez and the viewing group from Piura, Peru, for submitting this photo that you see right here of them participating in our second session of this series. Please share your viewing photos by emailing them to americanenglishwebinars@elprograms.org. The address is right there on your screen. We may feature your photo in the next session. So let's take a quick look at our schedule for this series. You can see that we have a great lineup of presenters and topics all throughout the series. This month, we're focusing on integrating critical thinking into the exploration of culture. In March, we'll be focusing on getting our students moving and active in the English language classroom. We look forward to seeing you for all of our sessions, which will be held, as I said, 8 a.m. or 1 p.m. Eastern Time from Washington, D.C. But they'll be broadcast from here on the American English for Educators Facebook page. A little bit about our sessions. They're each about 60 minutes long, depending on how much I talk. And you'll be able to respond to the presenter's questions in the comment box. Each session is related to a theme found on the American English website or an exciting new American English eTeacher massive open online course. The Teacher's Corner section from the website, shown here, features resources and lesson ideas related to this month's topic. In this month's Teacher's Corner, we examine what teachers can do to create a positive learning environment. So we want to announce that the American English eTeacher program is launching its second massive open online course, or MOOC for short, specifically for English language teachers like us. It's called Integrating Critical Thinking into the Exploration of Culture. It begins on February the 19th, and you can sign up now. So for more information and to register for free, that means 100% free, no cost, visit www.aeteacher.org/MOOC. The address is right there. Please go and sign up. You can also stay tuned here on this page for posts and links to register. Participants who complete this course will receive a digital badge, which is like an electronic certificate that they can share on social media, or you can share on your electronic CVs or resumes. Speaking of digital badges, you can receive one today from American English for Educators just for viewing and participating in this event. At the end of the session today, we're going to give you a link to complete a short quiz to receive your digital badge. You have to get 2 out of 3 multiple choice questions correct, and then respond to a short answer question. If you have been participating and if you've been paying attention, it shouldn't be a problem at all. You can only enter your information one time though, so please take your time, make sure that you read each question carefully. After you complete it, you should receive your badge by email within about a week. So finally, today's event, 2 frameworks for teaching culture and critical thinking. During today's event, our speaker, Andy, will explore the rationale for including culture as a principled area for study in the English language classroom, after which we'll do an interactive walkthrough of a lesson that harnesses listening and intercultural awareness skills. Andy will also explore a cultural mystery with the ultimate goal of developing students' ability to form critical questions rather than making instant judgments. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Andy Noonan. Andy has over 20 years of experience in TESOL methodology, teacher training, and online course facilitation. As a trainer of trainers at World Learning, Andy facilitates training and reflection sessions utilizing a variety of methods, including in-person observation and online engagement for trainees in U.S. Department of State funded programs. Andy's a former English language fellow and holds a master's degree in TESOL from the SIT Graduate Institute, as well as the UC-LAS Delta. He's taught and trained in Japan, Taiwan, Korea, Russia, Georgia, Mexico, El Salvador, and of course, the United States. So, Andy, welcome. It's really, really great to have you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Is my video out? Sure. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can see you great. We're very excited to have you.
There it is. Thank you. It's good to be here today, and it's good to be kind of virtually all over the world at once. My dream to travel more, and this is a way to kind of do it in a way.
Nice. I agree. I like that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Sitting in an office in DC, it does. I can feel the connection out there with the teachers all over. So thank you for that really kind introduction. Just a tiny bit of background. I was born in the tiniest of rural towns in Washington State, in a place where there was basically one culture and one language in my family and in my community. So this exploration of culture that I've kind of been on as a lifelong process as a language teacher and as a teacher trainer. It's a process that, builds slowly over time. And what I'm hoping today is that the 2 frameworks we look at today will bring a tool for teachers to be able to kind of deliberately build up that kind of cultural awareness with their own students in a way that I didn't have when I was a student in Brush Prairie, Washington.
Got it. Okay, so wait, really quickly. So I'm in Washington, D.C. Where are you? You're not in Washington State right now, but you're pretty close, right?
No. Yeah.
Oh, you're in Washington, D.C.?
I'm right downtown Washington, D.C., yes.
All right. So we're actually pretty close. If I open my window, maybe I shouted, would you be able to hear me?
I would yodel back to you.
Nice. I like it. Great.
Okay. So for today's webinar, the things we're going to be talking about just as a kind of a quick overview, and we already had a bit of one, but we're going to give an overview of teaching culture in the English language classroom. We're going to look at some metaphors, and we're going to look at kind of a couple of key concepts that will help us frame this idea of culture. That teaching culture is such a huge subject, and it's, as it was brought up earlier in conversations with you, John Mark, it's a topic of many PhDs and dissertations and things like this. So covering it in an hour, we can only really scratch the surface. But hopefully we'll give the teachers enough that they can bring something back to their own classrooms. So after we do this overview, we'll do an introduction of Pat Moran's Cultural Elements Framework and the Cultural Knowings Framework. We'll do a walkthrough of a lesson using these frameworks, and we'll end up with some reflection questions that hopefully the audience worldwide will be able to chime in on and help us figure it out from their perspective and help us see how they would use these frameworks in their own contexts.
Sounds great.
Good. So the first question that comes up is why teach culture? And as you mentioned earlier, I've taught in a number of countries, and I've run into a number of circumstances where students have said something to me or teachers have said something to me that really kind of sparked the answer to this. For example, a couple of years ago, I was at the University of Oregon, and I had a multicultural classroom, kids from Asia, kids from the Middle East, kids from South America, Central America. And I think I was talking about my newborn daughter. She was just a baby at that time. And one of my students says to me, "Andy, were you disappointed when your daughter was born and she had brown eyes and brown hair?" I'm a new father. This is my only child. I was ecstatic about my baby in any shape or form that she was going to be. But what this student, she was coming from a place where everyone in her culture had brown eyes and brown hair. And it was seen as maybe not exotic or not beautiful, perhaps from that culture's view. And it really, really struck me, of course, because she's talking about my own precious, precious daughter. And so for me, what this shows is this student is viewing the world from only her own eyes. She's not able to look at it from other perspectives. And so for me, that's a really big reason that we should be bringing cultural topics into the classroom to help kind of raise our students' awareness. Now, I'm sure, John Mark, you've taught everywhere also. Have you had some sort of similar experience?
Sure, I've taught in lots of places. I think a lot of my experiences working in the classroom is, I'm an American teacher, right? And so I have expectations that I bring into the classroom about what a student is supposed to do or how a student is supposed to behave. Things like, what does it mean to participate in class? And what does it mean to be on time for class? When you assign homework, what does it mean? And so many times I was challenged because my students had different ideas because they weren't used to having an American teacher.
Yeah. As a teacher, we run into that a lot. And that's always kind of maybe the first cultural bump that many of these students have is running into the teacher's expectations and the teacher having to respond and maybe finding some sort of middle ground. Did you end up making your classes the American way only?
No, I did not. What I wound up doing, Andy, was the classroom became kind of a borderland, an intercultural space where people were, allowed, encouraged to experiment and explore, which I think definitely enhanced my language activities,
Absolutely. And giving those students that kind of safe space to explore, to, say things that maybe aren't sensitive and to have those views challenged, I think is a very, very important thing that we can create in our language classroom.
So we have a couple of comments from our participants. Let's see, Yutaka Ishiguro says that teaching culture in the English language classroom is important to build positive motivation. I like that one a lot. And Cesar Campuzano says that culture is important to teach because language comes from culture. I would agree definitely that language and culture can be very, very closely related. Irina Litvinenko says culture helps us to understand each other. And let's see, Muhammad Saifuddin, why teach culture? Culture leads us to understand what we are learning, actually. I think what's inherent in that comment is culture is everywhere.
Yeah, and I also think going back to that first comment is that culture is naturally motivating. You bring in a cultural topic and students' interest is piqued. They're engaged. They're into this lesson. And I think a lot of the other things we might bring in, if it doesn't have that cultural component, it's maybe not as naturally motivated. Great points. Right. So the first thing I think we need to look at is what kind of culture are we talking about? And we often make the distinction between little C culture and big C culture. Now, when we think big C culture, we're talking about the architecture and the literature and the art, the music, the dance, the film that comes from a country. And these things often last a long time. I mean, they're not as changing as what a little C culture would be. When we're talking about little C culture, we're talking about those everyday things that exist within a culture that help define how people behave and how people think within that culture. So for an example on the next page, these are just some little C culture things that I've noticed since coming back to the States. Is that Americans, I think, have a very unique shoe style. And you can you can tell a lot by about a person by the shoes they wear. You can tell maybe their socioeconomic status. You can maybe even tell what kind of music they listen to, what sort of things they do in their free time. Another thing that has struck me about coming back to the States is dog sweaters. I don't remember seeing dog sweaters in a lot of countries, but that's in America. You have these people taking their dogs for little walks, and I live in, kind of a wealthy neighborhood. I, of course, am not wealthy because I'm an English teacher, but I live in a wealthy neighborhood, and people have their dogs out in little tiny sweaters on the really cold days. And I never remember seeing that. And it's a cultural element. It's a cultural product that I've seen that's been really striking. Other types of little C cultures are the way people greet each other, or the way people negotiate with each other over, business things or personal things. Coming back to America, actually coming to DC, the cashiers in DC have a certain style and a certain way of interacting with the customer that's, for me, very different than other countries I've been to, or even very different from the West Coast. So like it says at the bottom, the little C cultural elements are the everyday things that a learner would encounter. Learning these things are the ones that are going to help the student fit into that new culture more smoothly. I think the big C things are important.
Are both of these important to teach, though? I mean, I see there's a big difference between these two C's, little C culture, big C culture. Do we teach them both in the classroom, or in general, how do we do it?
We'll see that as we move through the frameworks, but I think there's space for both. I think that a lot of students enter a language classroom because the big C culture of the target language is really attractive. I've had a lot of students that study English simply because they love the music, or they love the films, or they love the art, or they love the literature, and they want to be able to read Ernest Hemingway in English. And that's a very legitimate reason for studying English. But if we're going to come to an understanding for kind of person to person and understanding other people's points of view, then we really need to look at the little C culture, because the little C culture is changing. It's changing every day, and each little subculture across, across the states, across the city of Washington, D.C. are different, and they require sort of kind of constant analysis, because they are so temporary. They are so changing.
Well, we have a really great comment from our participants. Rawan Bajlan brings up the importance of developing awareness and expectations. I think that's really, really important when we want to help our students to develop their own language skills, right?
Oh, absolutely. I would absolutely agree with that. Yeah, great. The next part we're going to move to is because culture is such a huge topic. One thing that's really helped me kind of approach it is having in mind a couple of really common metaphors, and I think a lot of teachers have probably seen these. Some of you haven't, so I'd like to look at them. And the first one is simply that culture is like an iceberg. Now, if you look at that image, and what you know about icebergs is only a little bit of the iceberg is actually at the top. That's why the Titanic sank, because they could only see that little bit at the top, whereas the bulk of the iceberg is underneath. So what that means is when we're teaching culture, you can see the behaviors, you can see the shoe styles and the dog sweaters and the film and the art, but that doesn't get to the meaning behind those things. So if we stop at that kind of superficial level, we're not getting to kind of a deeper understanding of what that cultural element might mean.
That's right. Now, what are the values that make people put sweaters on their pets, right?
Absolutely. Cold little dogs, cold little shivery dogs. And we have, obviously you can see John Mark and I have a certain attitude toward dog sweaters. We're laughing at that because it's kind of funny to us that we see that so often. And so that's kind of the second part of the iceberg, is this positive, negative opinions, feelings about that culture that we're seeing. And I think it's important that our students are allowed to have the space to talk about their feelings, to talk about their opinions about these cultural things that they're bumping into, because they're going to have an emotional response to it. I had a couple of students. I did one of these lessons with my students in Portland, in Eugene, Oregon, at University of Oregon, and my students were talking about how the greetings from their culture is kissing on the cheek, and they actually got a very negative reaction from Americans who had seen this. Not all Americans, but an American who said this commented to them in a really, really negative way. So bringing that into class and bringing that into a discussion, it's kind of a controversial thing. It's a kind of thing that would maybe hurt someone's feelings. But if we can open up a space where we can have a conversation about it, we can help the people get to a better place of understanding. So after this attitude,
one thing I'm taking away very quickly is that it's important for our students to know there's a lot happening that they don't see. So if they're practicing their English with somebody, no matter who it is, native speaker, non-native speaker, if they think about that person as kind of like an iceberg, there's what they see, but there's so much happening underneath the surface that they can't predict. And all of these things affect the way that we communicate.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, they do. And the first time I was plopped into a new culture, it felt like I was just walking around on the top of the iceberg the whole time. I was never able to get kind of underneath into those the deeper parts of it. And I think teachers are in such a lucky position that we can guide our students through discussion. We can guide our students to finding those sort of deeper parts. Absolutely. Great. So after that attitudes part, we get to the bottom of the iceberg, and that's the ultimate goal. Is we want to get to what you said, the beliefs and the values, the deep level assumptions about what is real. And it's very difficult. It's not done by simple multiple choice questions. It's not done by the teacher explaining something. It's done through kind of heartfelt discussion, possibly arguments that get to what these things possibly mean. Now, the next metaphor, I think, is also really important. And in this case, you have culture is an elephant. And as you see, there are 5 blind men touching different parts of the elephant. And this would be like one person, 5 different people encountering a culture in different way. The person in the back of the elephant is touching the tail. And what he's reporting out is that the elephant is like a rope. It's kind of tough, but it's long and thin. Whereas the guy on the ladder on top is like, no. The elephant is like a brick wall. It is huge. It is mighty. It's hard to get across this. Whereas the guy in front touching the leg is like, no, it's like a column of a building. Each one of them is correct in a way, but on their own, they're fairly far from the truth. But if they come together, if they're able to share their opinions and discuss what they found and put the whole picture together, then they have a better idea of what this culture might be, or what this elephant might actually be. And for me, it's keeping those 2 metaphors in mind is useful for a teacher, knowing how much work goes into developing cultural awareness, how big of a task it is, but also how much dialogue needs to happen for us to find answers.
We have a really interesting comment that is relevant here, Andy, and that's we're talking about teaching culture or helping our students to have cultural awareness. But when the teacher has cultural awareness, then that means the students themselves might feel more comfortable in the classroom as well. So in other words, it's a responsibility of ours to have this skill, not just to help our students to have it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But it also puts us in a position as, well, what if you're an English teacher who's never traveled? And this happens a lot. There's a lot of teachers in small villages who have learned good English through whatever means, and now they're trying to bring other students along on that cultural ride. I'm a little afraid of the idea of the teacher as the holder of the knowledge. And I've seen that in some cultures that I've been in, is the teacher is expected to have absolutely all the answers. And I think if we're going to have these honest conversations, the teacher, yes, I'm hoping that they have this intercultural knowledge to a degree, but they also need to be able to step back from their sort of holder of the knowledge position to open themselves up to listening to those other opinions. So the teacher's role is often very different.
Wait, are you telling me that I'm not supposed to know everything in the classroom?
Now, John Mark, you may actually know everything in the classroom. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt on that one, but absolutely not. And that doesn't just go for culture. That goes for language also. When teachers are I've been overseas when teachers have been encountering authentic language. They look at a text and they're kind of scared of these authentic texts because the language is being used in ways they don't know. And for me, I understand their vulnerability because the students have always looked at the teacher expecting to get the right answer. And I think it's a very vulnerable position for the teacher to say, actually, I don't know what this little vocabulary chunk means. Let's go find out together. And then using kind of online resources to discover what the meaning is for language or for culture. I mean, there's a really kind of stepping away from that master of all the knowledge role that has to take place sometimes.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Yep. So the next little bit is that we need to draw attention to is C1 versus C2. And when I talk about C1, I'm talking about the student's home culture. This is the culture that they were raised in, the culture that they currently live in. Whereas
so we're not talking about language level. This isn't the Common European Framework, right?
That's correct. That's correct. This is something different. We're not talking about the European Framework. C2 is referring to culture too, the outside culture. And this is what the students are finding in the textbooks that they're using. My idea, and I've seen this expressed, we got a comment from Soo Kyung Shin earlier, and he said, we think knowing the target language culture is more important than ours, so only try to teach that. But if students learn our own culture in English class, they can talk and inform foreigners more precisely about our culture. And that's what I experienced overseas, was my students could really talk well about other cultures because that's what the textbooks concentrated on. But they had trouble telling me about the temple that was 200 meters from our school. They had trouble telling me about what ceremonies, what beliefs were wrapped up in that, simply because they didn't have the language. One of the big ways that students are going to need their language in the future is explaining their culture to people from the outside. So I think that this is an opportunity for teachers to use these frameworks we're going to talk about to look at both positive and negative aspects of their own culture, to build their language skills, but also to build their awareness.
Helping students to learn and understand more about perhaps beliefs and values that they don't have or that are foreign to them can also help them to understand themselves a lot more clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And what I see is a lot of classes jump to that C2 culture, and I don't see the students ready to have kind of critical discussions about the positive and negative things that they see. So they're rushing to the judgments. If we can start with our own culture and discover that, yes, there's some really positive things about my culture, but there's some really weird negative things that could possibly be changed about my culture, and let's have a really nice discussion about them. That gives them, for me, that puts them in a better place to start looking at outside places.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. So the benefits of teaching C1, Kate. As we talked about, it builds the ability for students to talk about their own cultures, and this is usually ignored by textbooks. Textbooks are created for a general worldwide audience, so it's logical that they would be looking at English-speaking countries for their cultural content. It allows students to build pride in aspects of their culture. A lot of students don't even have the ability to look at their culture and say, wow, this is something we do here in my country that's maybe very unique and very special, and other people could learn from this. And on the other side, it allows students to critically analyze possibly negative aspects of their own culture. And as we said, it allows students to see culture from an outsider perspective. And this should enable students to critically analyze outside cultures with more sensitivity. So in a moment, I'm going to be introducing the two frameworks from Pat Moran. And the reason I'm bringing these to you today, because I use them in my own practice. And I just found them relatively easy to use. I also found them very versatile. I can use them with video, with music, with role plays in the classroom, with discussion styles, with stories that a student might bring in. There's a lot of ways we can use these that it's kind of low resource. You don't need papers and pictures to actually use these and build in these kind of really productive discussions. It also allows the teacher to exploit textbooks to a deeper level. Often the textbooks will show you, this is Ayr Rock in the outback in Australia, and this is what people do there, and this is what it means to the Aboriginal culture. But it doesn't go deeper than that. Whereas using these frameworks, again, allows the students to maybe get closer to the bottom of the iceberg. And it also helps build the mental processes that enable students to be more culturally aware and better able to function in a 21st century globalized world. Like we said, we're talking to teachers all over the world right now.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So we have a question from our audience. Romaldo Mabuan wants to know, what if culture is not on the syllabus, right? I mean, we agree that this is an important part of language learning because it is literally everywhere. But if it's not on the syllabus, can we do this?
I think there's a lot of space for it. If our students are going to learn, if they're going to learn to speak English, they need practice speaking English. And this is a way to bring in an engaging topic to practice. Like we said at the start, language and culture are inseparable. So actually, you can't teach the language without exploring the culture to a certain degree. But if we stay at kind of a superficial level, we're kind of doing our students a disservice. I don't think using these frameworks, I think, can be kind of quick and easy. It can be a 10-minute discussion in class. So I don't see it as taking away from the syllabus. I think I see it as adding to a syllabus.
Yeah, and I think maybe because it is everywhere, it informs everything that we do, we can find a way to fit it into what we're already teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's the way I use it. I've always been worked under a syllabus, and I've found ways to bring this in to liven up a lesson. You know, when I'm on a Friday class and I want, you know, it's been kind of a slow week, lots of academic writing. It's like, all right, let's liven these guys up, give them a good weekend. Then I'll bring in a cultural lesson. Yeah, great. So the first framework I'm going to talk about is the cultural elements framework. Now, all of these come from Dr. Pat Moran, and they're actually almost 20 years old. They're not new. But as I've been overseas during that time, I've talked to a lot of teachers who do struggle to bring culture in a meaningful way. So I'm happy that even though these are not, you know, the freshest thing off the press, that they are a tool that people can use. So the cultural elements framework divides culture into 5 different elements: products, practices, persons, communities, and perspectives. By looking at culture in this way, by going into, like, if we watch a video, it's got 1,000 cultural elements we can look at, and it's too much. The elephant's too big. But if we can go in and isolate one element for exploration, for discussion, it gives us a kind of a clear entry point to looking at culture, rather than trying to just discuss the whole thing.
So if we were to use the elephant analogy, sometimes if we try and describe the whole thing, we won't understand it, or it's too big of a topic. Maybe it's too big for anybody to ever know, but yes, we can focus on little pieces of it that might be windows into bigger understandings.
Absolutely, absolutely. We can start by talking about the trunk, and then we can move on to talking about the tail, move on to talking about the back. And by putting those together, then we're going to, you know, we'll build up towards understanding, because we're not talking about building cultural understanding in a day. It's a lifelong process, but it's building the tools. It's building kind of the mental tools for the students to look at, to subdivide culture, to break culture down into places that they can analyze on their own, which is the ultimate goal of these 2 frameworks.
I like it because then you talked about teaching academic writing before. We would never expect a student to be able to write an academic essay after one lesson, right? As teachers, we break it into little pieces, and eventually they become more skilled at doing something more complex. So understanding cultural concepts is the same kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That was a really nice way to put it. Okay. Let's see. The next slide is just gives us a brief, tells us what this does. It allows students to isolate elements of culture for further exploration. By looking at one element in detail, students can build the ability to recognize and start to do that analysis on their own. On the next slide, we can see some examples of what each of these elements are like. And I've drawn a lot of these from my experience in Japan. I lived for 8 years in Japan. And so when I first arrived there, these are some of the things that kind of showed up for me. So the products are the things created and used in a culture. So chopsticks in Japan are very different from chopsticks in America. They have a different symbolic use. They have different behavior that you do with a chopstick. The first thing that Americans usually do is pick up their chopstick and use them like drums. And everyone at the table gasps because it's a really sort of offensive thing. So knowing proper what the chopsticks mean to that culture is useful just to fit in. But it also gives us
chopsticks are not musical instruments.
They are not. They most certainly
glad
are
to know that. I'm really glad to know
Yes.
that. Thank you.
Don't get in trouble with that. Convenience stores is another product of that culture. Convenience store in every country I've been in is slightly different than the other countries. In Japan, when you go dancing, there's something called a pata dance, which is dancing basically with your hands facing the DJ, and every song has its own hand movement. And for me, that was a very unique thing. But it was a product. It came out of that culture, and by exploring it, we can find out more about that culture. Practices are the behaviors within that culture, the things people do, or the social interactions. Greetings, how people show respect to each other, the manner in which they exchange business cards, and how you accept a business card can be unique from culture to culture. Now, the persons are the people acting within the culture. The culture is within them, so what they do and how they behave and how they dress and how they think is mostly determined by the culture that they are raised up in. So things like in Japan, there was a salaryman. A taxi driver in Japan is kind of this elevated person wearing white gloves. They have automatic doors that open for you, and it's the cleanest car you've ever been in. It costs a little more than you'd expect, but the taxi driver himself holds himself with this great manner of respect, which is, again, maybe different than I've seen in other places. Communities are groups of people who share values and behaviors. Sports fans is one way to see it, because a sports fan by themselves, I work with many sports fans, and they're, really nice, gentle, normal people. But if I put them in a crowd of their fellow sports fans, they get rowdy. Maybe they drink a lot of beer. Maybe they yell things out. They act differently within that community because that community has a different set of standards. It has a different set of values that creates their behavior. And then the perspectives are the underlying beliefs of a culture. And the perspectives are what underlie the practices, the products, the persons, and the communities. And these are a little harder to get to. In Japan, there was a great respect for teachers and elders. There was also this idea of wabi-sabi, which I can't explain, but it was kind of the beauty of imperfection. If you have something that's absolutely perfect, if you put some imperfection on it, it's even more beautiful. One way that we can see perspectives on the surface, because usually they're right at the bottom of the iceberg, is through idioms. So an American idiom is what? Time is money, which really kind of shows our capitalist instincts that I can't be wasting time at work looking at Facebook. I need to be doing my job, creating capital for my company, something like that.
Okay, so then very quickly, the way I see it, products, these are the things we see. Practices, these are the things we do. Persons, these are the people in the culture. Communities, these are the groups of people in the culture. And perspectives, these are like the values and assumptions that inform everything else.
Perfectly
And we
said.
can take each of these and like piece them out in the classroom, kind of like exploring different parts of the elephant.
Yes, yes, absolutely. We can start with any of those. Like I said, perspectives is harder to get to. We may have to start with one of the other four to get to the perspective, but that's our ultimate goal. Yeah, absolutely. So Kate, the next framework is the cultural knowings framework. And the cultural knowings framework is built on the experiential learning cycle. And you can see that the arrows move it around in a circle. It moves, if you start, what is that? The upper left, that is through participation. So this is somebody actually does something. In the classroom, what this looks like is I have two students from the same culture who get up and do their culture's greeting in English, word for word in English, but it's an actual act they can do. Or it's two students from the same culture doing a negotiation, and then mixing it up and having two people from different cultures doing a negotiation to see how those cultures interact. But that starts us out, and then we can ask those questions to kind of pull out the details. If I don't have live actors, live students who are willing to do this, then we can start in the upper right with maybe watching a video, listening to music, looking at a picture, and then describing it. Again, what happened, what did you see or hear, but pulling out the details. That moves to interpretation, looking at the different perspectives and comparisons, and then moving on to the reactions and what else do we need to know. I think the really elegant part of this is that we're describing everything in as much detail as possible before we analyze it. So we're taking as much evidence as we can, getting it out front, so we're not jumping to conclusions. We're not letting our emotions take over our reactions. We get the evidence out, then we analyze it, then we figure out what more we need to know.
Got it. We have an interesting comment, and I want you to address it, Andy. What should be, when we're teaching, we're English teachers, what should be our target culture? Because according to Romualdo Mabuan, American culture, because we're teaching English, if we do that, aren't we just westernizing our classrooms? What do you have to say about that comment?
I have a lot to say about that. Do we have 2 more hours? I would absolutely not hold up native speaker culture as the target culture. My first thought is, what culture are your students going to be interacting with? So when I was teaching in Japan, most of my students were learning English for, a variety of reasons. But if a businessman was learning English, he wasn't learning English because he was going to America, because he was going to be interacting with native speakers. It was because he was going to be going to China or Korea or Indonesia or Malaysia and interacting with businessmen from that country in English. So knowing the American culture is not going to help them. I think culture is such a huge elephant that I wouldn't even suggest that my students need to know. If this Japanese student doesn't need to know, he can't learn from my class the culture of 5 different countries. But what he can do is he can build up the tools, which hopefully these frameworks do. He can build up the tools that when he enters that culture, he can ask the right questions and he can react in a way that's going to allow him to understand the culture kind of quickly. Great question.
Got it. Well, thanks, Andy. I assume that pretty soon we're going to be talking about practical classroom application, yeah?
We're getting right there. We're on the cusp. Good. Kate, can we have the next slide? Okay, this is basically what I just said a minute ago. It's based on the experiential learning cycle. It takes the students step by step through a cultural element they may have seen or experienced. Next part. As I described, the first box is describing the cultural element allows the students to see it from multiple angles based on direct evidence. Analyzing the description allows understanding to develop from these multiple views, the multiple perspectives. And then responding to this allows the students to explore their own reactions and, more importantly, create questions to find out more. Because like we said, it's too big to know everything, but building the tools to approach it sensibly is the most important. Okay, now what we've done today in the lesson I'm going to walk through is using video. I really like video because it's so culturally rich, and I can walk into a class with a video that maybe I've identified a couple things that are interesting to me about the culture, but what I find is my students find things that are interesting to them. And so instead of following kind of my agenda, we follow the students' agenda to explore what they question about what they saw in that video. I like to use modern TV shows, 2-minute clips from a movie, things on YouTube, sometimes a music video. What we're watching today is from the Voice of America. And this series of videos looks at kind of people's thoughts and opinions in Midwest of America, the heart of America, as they say, as America's kind of going through a time when there's a lot of discussion in America about this side and that side and how the best we can go forward as a nation. And this video series attempts to explore that. Now, as a listening lesson, I bring I'm going to use these two frameworks as a listening lesson. So it's going to follow a PDP framework with pre-listening tasks, during tasks, and post-listening tasks using those two cultural frameworks. For the pre-listening tasks, of course, we activate background knowledge. I want everything that my students to know about this subject to be kind of at the top of their brains, at the tip of their tongue, ready to talk about. I also want to somehow create interest in the topic and then pre-teach any vocabulary that is essential for them to complete the tasks. In this case, the tasks is being able to go through the framework. So some of the pre-vocabulary that we would look at for this next one is hippie culture. I think it came out of the late 60s in California as a reaction to the Vietnam War, but it came this idea that personal freedom and personal freedom of expression is very, very important. And there were a lot of things that went along with that. There was the certain type of music, there was a certain type of hairstyle, there was a certain type of the thought that you should be traveling and moving across the country more. So those are the hippies. John Mark, do you have a negative or positive opinion of the hippies?
Well, I think that, I am a language and culture professional, so my professional opinion is, of course not. They are just, a cultural artifact. But there are certainly parts of the United States, different generations or groups of people that might have a positive or negative view of hippie culture, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone's got an opinion, even within America. And I think people from the outside are going to have kind of an instant reaction to the word hippie. The next part, and it's connected, this woman at the start of the video is going to say, "I am a hippie." So she's proud of that. But she chuckles knowing that people on the outside are maybe view that negatively. One thing that she espouses, or what that she thinks is a great thing, is living off the grid. Now, that means that she is not connected to the state or city water services, their electric services. She is trying to live kind of out of modern society as much as possible, and she must see some sort of benefit to that. And that's going to end up being a conversation that we'll have. We can see that she's got a small cabin out in the woods. It's not a lot, she doesn't have a mansion with 3 cars out there. She's living maybe very simply. And this is part of her life philosophy as a self-proclaimed hippie, that living off the grid for her is a positive thing to do. The next one is solar panels. The fact that she's living off the grid means she needs electricity to run certain devices in her house. And she doesn't want to be connected to the city electricity. She wants a renewable resource, one that's not, using hydroelectric power or using coal, but just being generated every day by the sun. So she's got solar panels on the side of her house. Great. So I would pre-teach this vocabulary, and then the first task would be to give the students, do a gist task, do a short listening of the text so they can get a basic understanding of what it's about. So in this case, I would play a short snippet, maybe 10 seconds, 30 seconds, and ask the students to complete a task that demonstrates they understand the basic theme. They could choose the best title out of 3 titles I've given them. They could choose the most accurate summary. I could have a bunch of pictures, and they could circle the items that they think the woman owns or does not own based on that first 30 seconds. Answering one of those tasks correctly shows me that the students understand the basic theme of what that video is going to be. And that's an important listening task when we're out in the real world. So after the gist task, we do the listening task number 2, find all the cultural elements. And then I play the video. This time I do the whole video. I keep it a short video, 1 to 3 minutes, no more than that. I have the students write down all the cultural elements they find and then compare them with a partner. And they're going to check the students' answers aloud and give language support if needed. As a class, they try to identify the cultural element that is most interesting, strange, or mysterious. And when I say mysterious, it's some element that they can name it, but they can't name why it is, or it's so different from their own culture that they want to talk about it more. And we go back to the next one. So my students start out with this as a worksheet, and I think this is on the Ning site for participants to work along with, or you can use your scratch paper. Again, they're going to watch 1 minute, or they're going to watch the whole video and just mark in as many elements as possible. Now, Kate, could you play the video? And if you're at home, you could be going along with us. What elements do you see? And try to identify as many as possible.
I'm a hippie. Let's start from that. And that means back to the land, connected with the earth. I live in a small cabin off the grid on 20 acres. I have solar panels. I have no running water. I have a spring that I get my water from. I have space and animals and earth and sky and eagles and coyotes, and life is good.
Perfect. And that's enough for the students to start to see the different elements that are in there. So their job is to look through there, to watch that, talk to a partner, what did the partner see, and then fill out that cultural elements framework as completely as possible. Now we can see the next slide. There's a lot of things we can see. We can see the solar panel, the small cabin, the dog, the kind of messy yard. We can see the way the woman's dressed. That's a lot of the products. What is she doing? Well, she's living simply, isn't she? She's doing this thing called living off the grid. We can go to the next slide. And I don't do this in the real lesson. I don't let them see this, but for our sake, here's what she said in that first 20 seconds. What elements can you see there?
This is very interesting, Annie, because the language is actually really simple, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, she speaks in small, short little sentences, nothing too complex. It'd be harder at the natural speed, but what's that?
Even if we don't know what the values are behind something, let's say we discover this video, we don't know much about hippie culture. Can we still use this to teach and maybe show it to our students and they can at least make predictions about it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, it's building the skills to approach it logically. and not just have that reaction. So yeah, I think this is a very kind of non-controversial. There's nothing too outlandish in this video to stir up too much controversy, but it's a nice way to, even by looking at the words, we can see some of her values.
So even if the teacher's not 100% familiar with the culture behind the video, students can still look at it and try and identify what products do they see, what practices do they think they see, is there a community that maybe they see? And maybe they're right, maybe they're not right, but they're still building the same skills, aren't they?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. And again, the teacher's role is not the authority, but somebody who's exploring with the students. Good. If we can go to the next slide. There we go. So I went ahead and did this for you. These are some of the elements that kind of come out from that short clip. We mentioned the products, the practices, living off the grid, owning an outside dog. In DC, everyone has an inside dog. And when they go outside, they have to put a sweater on. But an outside dog is a dog that doesn't have a leash. It just wanders around outside all day long. It's not wild. You know, it can come in during the wintertime sometimes, but mostly it lives outside. And that's a different thing in different parts of the country. The person, again, she told us she's a hippie. Community, we can assume there's other hippies around, and she talks more about that later. And then the perspectives. Some of these perspectives are interesting and would be the jumping off point for more exploration. Living off the grid is better than living in organized society, according to this woman. Sacrificing modern conveniences for freedom is a good thing. Pride in one's subculture. I mean, she's obviously proud that she is this hippie. And feeling connected with nature is a positive thing. These are all perspectives that can come out of even a short video like this. I think because I'm American, I can find those quite easily. I think for teachers worldwide, it would take more digging. Next slide.
I want to let you know, Andy, we only have a few minutes left.
Yep. So a brief description of this. So the third listening, after they've found the elements, then they start moving through the cultural knowings framework. So they describe what happened, what did you see or hear, what are the details. This is a long discussion. This is a 5 or 6 minute discussion. I may go back and play a clip so they can hear 1 or 2 sentences again, over and over, because we're still helping to develop the students' listening ability at the same time. So this is the details listening. Next one. They can see this again if they need. Actually, they can't see this again, but this is the words that they would listen to again. And I would pinpoint probably that last sentence. And animals on earth and sky and eagles and coyotes and life is good. Because it really shows you that she really thinks living this way is the best way. Next slide, please. And then we move into the post tasks. We've probably listened and watched the videos enough, so now we moved one step further in through the knowings framework into interpretation. And we answer these questions about the cultural mystery of why is living off the grid something that is a good thing? What does it mean? How can you explain it? What are the insiders' perspectives? So first we would explain it from that woman's perspectives. What does she say that makes this kind of living preferable? And then what are the outsiders' perspectives? My students are the outsiders because they're not hippies living in the woods. And so they can give their opinions about maybe what would be the good things, what would be the bad things, and why would this be something that they would or wouldn't want to do.
And my guess, Andy, is that the answers to these questions really can't be predicted. There's no right answer. There's no wrong answer, right?
This is really where you're going to see different parts of the elephant coming out. One student's going to say one thing, another kid will say something completely different, a third one's going to add something different. And it's the teacher's job at that point to kind of put these together in a way that makes sense. But yes, there is no right or wrong answer. There's little bits of right everywhere. And the final question, how does this compare with your culture or other cultures? So we're really now analyzing this cultural bit and being able to compare it with other places we've seen. And this is going to build that sense of kind of shared humanity. No, I don't have hippies in my country, but yes, I have people who live like this. You know, religious people in some countries live simply off the grid, out in the woods or in a cave. in a monastery. There's other people that you can make those kind of cross-cultural connections. Next slide. The final part of this, and again, this is a post-listening task, is the knowing oneself. And this is the final box of the knowings framework. The students will answer things like, okay, what do you think? How do you feel about this now? How does this affect you? What more do you need to know? And then what I like to do is have my students actually together create questions that they would ask that woman, because that's what I want my students at the end, their response to finding the cultural element, to describing it, to analyzing it, is for them to become able to mentally go through the process to come up with a question or two questions that they would then try to ask somebody to get more information about that. So the exploration of culture is not an ending point, but it's another opening up point, if that makes sense.
It definitely makes sense.
Okay, so I think we are out of time, correct? Do we want to go through these last questions?
Pretty much. We can wrap up very quickly. I think we'll be okay.
Okay. So questions that I would ask teachers of the world, and these are questions you can think about as you think about this webinar today. But what is the role of the teacher when using these frameworks? We kind of talked about that. It's a different role. We're not planting information on kids, but we're opening up the class to have information come out and thoughts and opinions come out. Could these frameworks be used for reading, writing, speaking? I'll let you decide that. What homework would you give with this? How would you adapt this lesson for your students or for younger learners? For younger learners, I use children's books. Children's books are so rich in culture, in the words and the pages. Would you use English to have these discussions with a young student? I don't think they could, unless they're really, really high level. Could these discussions be happening in your native language? Absolutely, absolutely. And what elements of your culture do you think your students would benefit from thinking more deeply about? And that's a question I'd like everybody to kind of think about going forward from today. As you looking at these frameworks, how could you use these frameworks to teach something from your own home culture? This is your homework. This is a 5-page essay I'd like you to write.
Wait, I didn't know we were getting homework today, Andy.
You can submit this to John Mark
Right, I'll be grading all 20,000 of them.
This is another discussion you can have if you're sitting there with a partner or a co-teacher. Again, has your ideas about teaching culture changed, and what can you try this week? Because the sooner you can try one of these things, the sooner it's going to be part of your home practice. If we wait long, I've been to so many seminars, I don't try anything, and then 6 months later it's gone and never to come back again. So I would ask everybody to try something soon. Other than that, here's my references, and thank you very much.